If you're sick of the mainstream sports outlets, well, so was I. So I started my own show. I'm Shane Larson, and this is the Game Time Guru. It's different than other talk shows. I'm providing a panoramic view on sports so you can see them through a different lens. So buckle up, and let's go. What's up, everybody? Shane Larson here, also known as the Game Time Guru. Now, if you guys haven't subscribed to my podcast, I'd highly advise you to do so. Please make sure to go to any of your podcast platforms and search the Game Time Guru and hit the subscribe button. Also, if you could leave me a review. Leaving a review on my podcast helps immensely because it helps for the ratings. It helps when people are trying to search for the algorithms and this and that. So if you could, listen to an episode, maybe leave me some feedback. A rating and a review is always helpful for all of the media consumers who are trying to find new podcasts to listen to. You might come across that one and they see a couple of reviews. You never know if your review is going to help somebody else in determining whether or not they want to actually listen to that show. So I appreciate you guys. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the show. I appreciate everybody who's always shown their support for the channel and for my show. So guys, today it's going to be a quick episode. I really just wanted to talk about something that's kind of it's a passion of mine. It's a sport that I absolutely love. Those who know me from like my high school days on know that I absolutely love. I love fighting in any form for that matter. Now, I don't love getting in fights. I love the sports of fighting, and that's boxing. That's MMA. I love it all. I have a mad respect for each of the sports. I mean, I understand the dislikes that people have for those sports in regards to like the diva-esque nature of them. Sometimes you get the drama that comes along with promoting a fight, but that's actually part of selling the big time fights. And that's what I wanted to talk about today is the money side of it, and how much money is generated by these fighters now, and how does that affect the fighters for that matter. So I understand the reason for the dislike, but I have a mad respect for the sport of boxing and the sport of mixed martial arts. So anywho, I wanted to talk about this today because this last weekend, like 2 weeks ago, whenever you're listening to this, Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz had a rematch in the heavyweight division of boxing. And it's crazy because the first time around, the reason they're having a rematch is because Andy Ruiz beat Joshua 6 months back, and basically became the heavyweight champion, and he basically came up from nothing. And in that fight, he made roughly $7 million. And that's from like pay-per-view, his part of like the pay-per-view shares, as well as his purse for the actual fight. He made $7 million, I believe, was the total. And it's crazy because, Anthony Joshua made a lot more than that, even though he lost that fight. It's just the way the boxing works is the different promotions that are in the sport. That's why, like, for the general fan, like, you might see, like, Tyson Fury, who's my favorite fighter, who I'll actually be doing a book review on for his book that I just read. You'll see Deontay Wilder. You'll see Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz, and you might wonder, why aren't these guys fighting each other? Why aren't they all fighting each other? Why don't they just put the best with the best? And I think a lot of the fighters want that, but at the same time, they can't do that because of the different promotions. Certain promotions have certain contracts, and they have to abide by those. Anywho, it's kind of interesting. It's one of those things with boxing that's kind of annoying because they all have different promoters. There's different belts. There's different this and that. Even though they're all heavyweights, you might call Deontay Wilder's the heavyweight champion of the world, but now Anthony Joshua is the heavyweight champion of the world. Like, who's the heavyweight champion? And so that's why the fighters even want it to be like, okay, let's have a unified champion. Let's just fight the best against the best, and let's go. Forget the promotions and let's go. Anywho, that's a side note. The fact of the matter is, Anthony Joshua defeats Andy Ruiz in the rematch, right? He beat the crap out of him for the entire fight, just outboxed him. And that's why I love boxing, is because it's a sport, it's an art. It's not just go in there and throw punches wildly. There's breathing techniques, there's angles. There's a whole side of boxing that people don't realize. Pardon me. They don't realize that there is so much going on in the ring, and to be a good boxer, you can't just have knockout power. You have to be able to control a ring, and that's by taking angles, understanding the angles and the rhythms and the punches that your opponent throws, and how to counter those with different punches from different angles. There's so much that goes into it that people just don't realize until you've actually fought. And even though I was only fighting at an amateur level for the 3 years that I fought in high school, it still showed me that there's like even in the amateur level, you can see the middle tier amateurs compared to the top tier amateurs, and the difference in speed and reading punches and understanding how to control a ring and how to throw punches without gassing out, like all that stuff. You realize it when you've actually fought. That's why I have a mad respect for the sport of boxing, especially at a high level. Now, the thing is, what I wanted to talk about is how money can potentially change a fighter. So Andy Ruiz basically came up from nothing in Mexico, and he earned $7 million in that first fight. And during the last 6 months, I've been following Andy Ruiz because I never really followed him before. I didn't know his story. So I kind of I became intrigued. He beat Anthony Joshua, who's one of the top fighters in the entire world at this point at that division. And I was like, I want to see this. He's kind of, I don't want to be rude, but he's just he's not the body shape that you would see or expect to be winning heavyweight championships. He's a little bit on the heavier side. He doesn't take, whereas like Anthony Joshua is more of like the bodybuilder type build. He's sculpted, jacked, if you will. And, they're just a different style. But anyways, Andy Ruiz was the typical come up story, like come out of nowhere, got all this money, and then I followed him, and you could see he was a spender. Like he had never had that money before, so he's buying tons of cars, partying, and he's known to have weight problems. So like the last fight, he came in at like 268-ish. Correct me if I'm wrong. Put a comment here below. But he came in at like 268 or 260 something. In this fight, he was in the 280s. Just when you thought he couldn't get heavier, not to be rude, but like he's already kind of on the heavy side. Pardon me. He got heavier and came into the fight pretty heavy. And anyways, he was partying it up. He was eating, drinking, doing his thing, having a good time. He's enjoying his life with the money that he's never had before. He's taking care of his family, his friends, his close friends and such. Like he was doing a lot of good, taking care of everybody and living it up with the money. And you kind of saw when he came into the rematch, even though Anthony Joshua had made more money in the first fight, even with a loss, you saw how Joshua handled himself preparing for this rematch. He took the rematch seriously. He prepared in his camp. He took care of his body. He actually lost weight, made sure he was a little slimmer than he was before so he could last a full set of rounds in a fight and just get the job done. Whereas Ruiz comes in heavier than he was prior, which is crazy because he was already kind of heavy. And so this conversation kept coming up. Well, did the money change Ruiz? Because he didn't look as motivated at all. And even though Ruiz came in, this is the crazy thing, like fighting, guys, Ruiz made $7 million the first fight, and he made $9 million-ish. They're still pulling numbers from the pay-per-view shares and this and that, but it was like set to make about $9 million in this rematch, even with a loss, right? So his guarantee was like $9 million, even with a loss. The thing is that's a lot of money. There's certain athletes that don't ever taste that amount of money. The fight game has a ton of money, and that's a very low amount compared to what Anthony Joshua was making. It's crazy because both fighters don't get the same purse. Certain fighters make more based on their promotions, based on how many pay-per-view shares they're pulling in, what they do. That's why fighters have to sell fights. It's kind of a business. You're a sales rep. That's why like you'll see Conor McGregor, him and Floyd Mayweather, you could kind of tell it was a little bit fake. They still had a little emotion when they were doing their promos at different cities, but it kind of got to the point where it was getting old. It's because they're trying to sell the fight, which they did well as well. Like Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather sold that fight too, that boxing match. I was insane how much money they both made off of that. So, anywho, my point is, So my point is they sell the fights for a reason, but it's crazy to see that Ruiz kind of changed as a fighter. He became undisciplined. The money kind of just. Let me fix this real quick. I have this headset here that I'm using. The money changed him. And I just wonder if that's like a massive issue amongst a lot of people, especially in the fight game, because there's so much money generated. Are they just fine once they make the money? Here, let me show you this. Let me show you this screen real quick. As you guys see here, let me pull it up here. Sorry. So as you guys can see here, this was before the fight. $2 million more than he earned in the first meeting, so $9 million is nothing to sneeze at. This isn't Ruiz's earnings ceiling. This is from Forbes. I was reading through this article. They were talking about if Ruiz would have beaten Joshua in that fight, in the rematch, he potentially would have had a chance to fight Deontay Wilder or Tyson Fury in the unified championship. Now that fight would have made even more money. So it's like how is this, when these fighters taste money for the first time, because it comes in a big chunk of money, does it change them, right? Does it change them? And it's crazy because I've always been a boxing fan, and it's weird because as you see behind me, I've got Roy Jones Jr.'s pictures up here. He's my favorite fighter. I love Roy Jones Jr. Always have. Thought he was one of the best. I don't think money changed him. Like he fought well, even when he was making tons of money, and he never got changed by it. But like you can even see Conor McGregor at the mixed martial arts level, right? Conor McGregor is dealing with the same thing, and people even brought that up. I think Chael Sonnen was talking about how McGregor, is he going to be motivated for this next fight against Cowboy Cerrone? Like, is he going to be motivated to get into camp and actually come out there, ready to fight? Because he's got so much money, so wealthy now, coming up from nothing. Similar to Ruiz, coming up from nothing, literally living with government assistance in his hometown, to now be like, McGregor in like a 4-year span of time just became the biggest headline in the sport. And it shows you, he worked hard for it. He got his chances. He capitalized on those chances. And even in his defeats, like when he lost his fights, he still made tons of money. Like the Khabib fight, tons of money. The first fight with Diaz, tons of money. And then obviously his boxing match that he's a businessman. He made millions and millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars with Floyd Mayweather. And so, he's loaded. And then you can kind of see he's sort of dropped off, right? Like he dropped off the face of the earth. He got himself in trouble. A lot of news. He's in the news for the wrong reasons, right? Because he had all this money and he's just kind of living his life. Now, does money change fighters? Does money change the way that they're motivated? We see it a little bit with other sports, like with football and with basketball. And we see people when they get their big time contracts, they kind of like take it easy. But we also see the other side of that too. They get their big contracts and they don't stop playing. They play. They come out here to entertain. But from the fight game, I think it's a little more drastic sometimes, especially with the biggest name fighters in the world. It can change them. My favorite fighter is Tyson Fury. I love Fury. He's one of my favorite fighters, and I love his book that I'm reading. I'm almost finished with it. Amazing story. And it's weird because I don't blame money for the issues he had. He had a mental illness. Like he had depression and anxiety that kind of took him to the depth of things. But I think money allows you to have access to certain things that you wouldn't have had access to before. And I think that can hurt a person. And you see how Fury, he was a heavyweight champion, beat Klitschko, and that's when he went into his deep, dark depression. He had money at that point. I don't think that was the only case of it, but you see kind of how he tastes it. But I love the fact that Fury comes out and he actually fights. He performs, but he understands that he has to sell his fights. He understands that he has to compete at a high level, and he still wants to win. I don't think he's going in there just accepting the money and taking his check and going home. I think Ruiz, for that matter, took his money and came home. I think he knew, hey, win or lose, I'm taking home a ton of money. Doesn't matter. I can eat a few more burritos, this and that. So it's a conversation that's worth having. I think it affects certain fighters more than the others, but it's weird because there's so much money generated in the fight game that I think it has more of a act. And there's not as many on a football team. You've got a ton of players on a team. Basketball team, same concept. But with fighters, the spotlight is on the actual individual fighter. It's an individual sport, not a team sport. So it gets highlighted a little bit more. It gets spotlighted a little bit more, and it's worth discussing. So I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are. Let me know. Follow me on all my social media feeds, especially Twitter at the Game Time Guru, Instagram at Game Time Guru. Go follow me there. Leave me your thoughts. I'd love to chat it up with you guys and see what your thoughts are. But I think that money can change fighters depending on their state, and I think it's a dangerous tool because when you have that much power as an athlete, you have that much notoriety, the superstar spotlight's on you. When you have access to a lot of things you didn't have before, and a lot of things that aren't probably good for you in your life, that some would consider good. But look at Mike Tyson, for that matter. He already had problems with substance abuse, but when he started making millions and millions of dollars, he had more access to that, which put him into a deeper hole and a deeper hole and a deeper hole. I've been studying Mike Tyson the last couple of weeks, just watching some of his documentaries and listening to his interviews and seeing about his mental health and this and that and his substance abuse problems that he had when he was younger. And he talks about how the fact is, when he became a big-time fighter, it didn't matter, that he was a fighter. He had more access to those things because of the money and the fame. And so it's just crazy to look at the fight world and how money can affect you in a negative way. I'm not saying Ruiz was doing substance abuse, but it just kind of seemed like he got complacent once he made his money. He might be set for life if he's smart with it, but you can kind of tell Andy Ruiz was spending his money, having a good time, and then came into the rematch, just looked completely different, just didn't look as motivated and wasn't as good of a fighter, and just got outworked for the duration of the entire fight. And so something that's interesting, I wanted to bring up to you guys, bring that topic to the discussion here, and I'd like to get your thoughts. I appreciate you guys. Make sure that you follow me, subscribe to my channel. Once again, I appreciate it. Subscribe to the podcast and leave me a review if you can, especially on Apple Podcasts. It's always helpful when I can get reviews to help other people who are looking for podcasts. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time. Guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of my show. Now, if you could go and do me a favor, head over to iTunes, give me 5 stars, and leave me a review, it would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your support.